I'm privileged to be with each of you today. This is where all of us wanted to be this time every year. I'd like to repeat myself for one short moment. One day I hope you're going to get to live this long, but I hope maybe you might take a little bit better care of yourself so you won't be like this. I must tell you that I felt I was mobile forever, and then the sands of time caught up with me, and all these broken bones are now weeping and letting me know about it. So here I am. I'll be here as long as I can make it. I've got a special treat for you today. There's a gentleman here by the name of Jimmy Doolittle. Jimmy Doolittle, are you here?
Yes.
Where is he?
I said he's spinning, yes.
Is he here yet? How about coming up here on stage with me for a moment, please? My inspiration in getting into aviation was the great General Jimmy Doolittle, who led the first raid 3 months after Pearl Harbor on Tokyo. It was a one-way trip. They knew that they would drop those bombs, hit their target, and didn't know what would happen to them from that point on. I never dreamed in my lifetime that I would ever meet General Jimmy Doolittle. It was his grandfather, and he's the spitting image of his grandfather. Stay up here for a second. That is the spitting image of Jimmy Sr. I met his grandfather after World War II. He was head of 3 different air forces at different times in the early days of War II. And he was my inspiration. He was a man that I never dreamed I'd ever meet. And then after the war, I showed up at Wright Field and was assigned to flight test. And I was flying the first jets we had right after the war, testing them. And my commanding officer said, you're going to meet General Doolittle today after you put on your demonstration. And I thought, oh my God, he hung up, it was on a pedestal to me. Never dreamed I'd ever meet him. And after I'd finished my flight, the colonel that I reported to, he told him, he said, could I borrow your office for a few minutes privately? And of course he said yes. And I thought, oh man, what in the world have I done? I'd never met this wonderful person, but boy did I idolize him. And I went in the office waiting for what he was going to criticize me about. And he jumped up and shook my hands and he said, young man, I've never seen a flight demonstration like that in my life. He said, I want to be your friend. And he said, from now on, I know protocol will not let you call me anything but general in the presence of other people. But from this day, for the rest of your life, I will be Jimmy Doolittle to you. My God, I was just on cloud 9. And it was the beginning of a relationship, and I treasured getting to be with him for the next 20 or 30 years before he passed away. I went to all of his birthday parties. Everyone, he'd always say, call me up and say, now you're invited, you're going to make it. And I would. And this Jimmy Doolittle you've just met, his father was a classmate of mine in the test pilot school. And we were very well acquainted, flew together an awful lot. And it ended up when I met the Jimmy Doolittle you just met, it was a spitting image. He was only young, 3 or 4 years old, not even that old, when I was in test pilot school with his dad. But when I met him in later life, he became a test pilot. He went through he was a graduate of test pilot school and became the commandant of the test pilot school. And he was one of the best test pilots you could ever hope to meet. And he was the spitting image of his grandfather. For instance, Jimmy would go up to the people that were working for him and call them by their first name and ask them about each of their children by their first name. He was just simply the greatest commander anybody could ever have. And a man that had a heart like you couldn't believe. That's the spitting image, the gentleman you just met, of his grandfather. And I'm privileged to know the family members for all these years, and I'm just so delighted to get to see Jimmy the Third here. Anybody got any questions? Okay. I'll share one story with you then. Would you like that? I'm not going to ask you to raise any hands when I ask this question. But I want all of you to think about it for a minute. Everybody in this room probably drives an automobile. Is that right? You think so? Yes. Okay. Everybody in this room do not fly airplanes. Does that matter? No. We're in this aviation business. We're here because we love the business of aviation and aerospace. And we're a magnitude of people that are unheard of in any other organization you could have in the world. I've often thought now, let's look at how many of you who've never flown an airplane. Not that it matters. I'm not going to ask for hands. But you're in this business because you like what you're doing. You have camaraderie with all of the people you associate with. And it's a feeling, and it doesn't matter where you go in the world. It's there. It's contagious. Well, if you think about it, learning to fly is so much easier than learning to drive an automobile. And for those of you who don't fly, and you've sort of thought, I always wanted to do that, but I never had the time, never had the money. You had some good reason for not doing it. Well, I want to share with you that let's take a look at the risk in driving an automobile. When you learn to ride a bicycle, you learn to balance yourself. I'm sure we all fell down, skinned up our knees or elbows and learning how. But we did it. And then the next step, oh boy, I'd sure like to drive my old dad's car. And eventually you did. But look at the risk. There's not too many of these roads anymore, but there's still quite a few that we all drive on. You have traffic going in this direction and in that direction. and you're 5 feet apart head on. Now think about that for a moment. You're learning to drive a car, and you've got 2.5 feet on your side of that yellow line, and 2.5 feet on the other side are the cars coming toward you. Well, let's just say they're obeying the traffic signals. And they're only supposed to be going 30 miles an hour. So they're going 30 miles an hour in this zone. And what happens if somebody crosses that yellow line and hits that car head on? That's a velocity of 60 miles an hour. If you don't get clobbered, you're going to come very close to it and be injured, I'm sure, very seriously. Now, that is danger, but we all learn to drive a car. Now, let's compare that to what it's like learning to fly an airplane. In most cases, you go to an airfield. There's a big, nice runway, twice as wide as both of those lanes of traffic on the highway, and you look down it. If there's no control tower, you see whether there's another airplane there, and if there isn't, you clear yourself, you take off. Boy, that's no risk at all. All you got to do is stay in the middle of this big runway. Or if it's on grass, just head for some trees down there that tell you you're going in the right direction, and off you go. That's pretty easy, isn't it? And as you think about it, you can always look around, whether there's a traffic tower or somebody to talk to. All you have to do is keep your eyes open. And if there's traffic, and there's busy traffic on the airport, you wait your turn. And then you've got that whole big runway all to yourself. You don't have to worry about somebody coming at you. So what's easier? Don't you think it would be easy to learn to fly than driving an automobile? And certainly from a risk viewpoint, it's a heck of a lot safer. Do you agree? Yeah. Well, thank you for hearing me out. I have a lot of people ask me different things about highlights in my life, and a lot of people want to know, how did you get to know Charles Lindbergh? And I'll take a chance that most of you have not heard this story, but I was in Berlin after World War II. As a test pilot, I was testing different airplanes, and then when I would finish a certain test job, I would be requested by the government to go to different parts of the world and demonstrate the airplane to other countries who had bought our airplanes from the U.S., different types. And I would be sent off on a mission to go do that in addition to my flight test work. And on this occasion, I was sent to Europe and went, I don't know, maybe 20 different fields around Europe where I demonstrated. But when I was in Berlin, I performed, and upon completion, there were a long line of people waiting to get autographs or pictures with me, and I was, of course, obviously flattered. And this gentleman was standing in line, and when he came up to me, he said, "I'd like to spend some time with you, young man." And I said, "Well, sir, I'd like to spend some time visiting with you, but it wouldn't be very polite of me to spend time chatting with you, and I got 100 people waiting there to get an autograph or a picture." And he said, "I understand." And so he was dressed in clothes from back in the 30s. He had a suit that had a belt across the back, an old felt hat, and I didn't know who this old gentleman was. And so finally the crowd thinned out that I was signing for, and he was over there, and I looked up, and I remembered that I told him I would visit with him, I motioned for him to come over, and he said, the reason I want to see you and talk to you, he said, the narrator was telling me that in addition to aviation, that you've been involved with all kinds of secret clearances and are involved in space activities, rocket motors, and the future. And he said, I would like to gain some knowledge from you. And I said, well, I appreciate your interest. And I said, what's your name, sir? He said, it's Swartz, but I'm really Charles Lindbergh. I gasped, and I couldn't believe my hearing or my eyes. This was the Charles Lindbergh. This was just like with Jimmy. And I decided, wow, I can't believe this. And so we chatted for a long time, and he said, I've been under this assumed name in obscurity for the last 30 years. I said, yes, sir. I'm totally familiar with that. And he said, when are you going back to the States? And I told him, and he said, what airline? And I said, whatever it was. And he said, I'm on their board of directors. And he said, I'm going to go back to the States with you. It was back in the old prop days. He said, we'll have about 9 hours to visit. And he told me, of course, who he was, and I was just mouth hanging open, and he said, I'll meet you at the lounge. And so he did, and he had the seats reserved for us. He was a teetotaler, and I was too, and at the time, you notice I added that. But we really got to know one another in the length of that flight. And he said, here's what I'd like you to do. I have a top secret clearance. And he said, I would like to come out to Los Angeles and spend some time with you and some of the scientific people that you're working with on space activities, rocket motors. He said, I don't know if you knew this, but he said, I worked with Dr. Goddard on the first rockets that we ever had in this country. And I said, yes, sir, I'm familiar with your historical background. And he said, well, there's so much more research that's occurred in the last 30 years. And as they were describing what all you're involved in, I thought you would be the key to the door that could get me brought up to speed. Well, that was the beginning of sessions that he would come out to California, call in advance, and I'd drive up to the curb, and nobody would know who he was. I would take him over, and I got some of the most talented men in the world, scientific people who were working for us, and we had a cadre of them, maybe 50 or so experts in every field you could think of into space. And I set up briefings for him so that he could be brought up to date on everything that was going on. Well, when I got back to California, I explained that to Lee Atwood and Dutch Kinneberger, who were the founders and president and chairman of North American Aviation, about this experience, and I wanted their permission for me to do it. And they said, as long as you make sure that top secret clearance is still in effect. And so I said, I'll do the research on that. And I got a hold of the right people. And sure enough, he did still hold his clearances. Well, I've often looked back on that and thought, from that day on, for the next 20 or 30 years, the same as with General Doolittle, we became close friends. And he would come out there, and he'd stay for maybe 2 days at a time, and he'd come to my house and sit down at my bar and not have a thing to drink, and you'd never know it, because he would stay up as late as 2 o'clock in the morning telling me stories about the old airmail days and his trip across the Atlantic, all first-hand stuff. Well, that friendship really developed, and I've thought all of those wonderful people that addressed him, bringing him up to speed, would have given anything to have known to whom they were speaking to, and getting acquainted with what our research amounted to. They never met him, never did know it. And I've just thought, what a pity, because we all like to think that we've met somebody that important. And when you have met them under an assumed name, I thought, what a pity. And it really was. But that's my story about him, and the end of it is that that relationship went on and on. And at the time, I was the president of the Society of Experimental Test Pilots, worldwide renowned organization. And I had the idea that I'd like to have him. He said he'd like to become an honorary member, but he had to be there personally in order to receive it. Oh, I don't want anybody to recognize me. No pictures. Oh, no, none of that. And I said, by this time, I had to call him Slim, and I had a very difficult time. It was like General Doolittle. He said the same thing in private, I'm Jimmy to you. In this case, he said, I'm Slim. And I every now and then called him by his name. He'd correct me. Well, it was so interesting to me that I got the idea I could get international press for aviation if I were to call up Deke Slayton, who was head of the astronaut program down in Texas, and I said, Deke, I said, I know that Neil Armstrong, who was a test pilot friend of mine, and I had known very well, and we were on projects together. I said, I'd like to get the Apollo 11 crew here, and he said, Hoover, with a few curse words, you asked for the impossible. They in quarantine for 30 days, and that's the day after they get out. They haven't even been with their families. I said, I think I'm going to make history for you. I said, I've got Charles Lindbergh, who has agreed to become a member, but you had to be there in person. And to have the two of them together at the same time would be international news for anybody in the aerospace world. And he said, Hoover, I can't do that. I said, Deke, do you want me to take care of it, or do you want to do it yourself? He said, Hoover, you SOB. I know you can do it, so I'll go to work on it. I said, just when you call the White House, if you don't get through, just let me know and I can get through. I said, you tell him that you want the family to come with them, because he kept saying, they haven't been with their families. I said, have them flown out to California, and they won't be separated after the 30 days of quarantine. He said, I can't believe you. Anyway, they showed up, and Lindbergh showed up, and he was giving me fits all the time. Now look, I don't want anybody to recognize me. I'm going to get on that stage. I'm going to accept the award because that's the only way I can get it is in person. And I don't like it and I don't want to do it. I said, nobody's going to bother you. He said, I want you to bring me in on the backstage, and I don't want anybody to see me until you give me the presentation, and I want to sneak out. I said, I can't pull that off. It's a black tie event. And you would walk through that front door, and everyone in there is going to be in a tux. And I said, you'll just be another black suitor when you come through the front door. I'll be waiting for you by the door. And he was staying with one of his old airmail buddies from those early days. And so he dropped him off at the front door. He came in, and he said, where are you taking me? Well, I said, I've got a private party going up for some celebrity friends of mine in the presidential suite. And I said, my wife is up there hosting the party until you and I show up. He said, I don't want to go. I said, look, we've got a limited amount of time. He said, I want you to read. I want you to hear me speak. I'm going to give the speech to you. And I said, look, I said, I've got a lot of responsibility tonight. I'm the MC. I'm heading up this whole thing. He said, I'm not going unless you listen to my speech. So we went to my room. I told him it was right off the side of the suite. And I sat there, and I don't think I heard very much of what he had to say, but it was the most boring speech I've ever listened to. Worst thing I'd ever heard. And when he got through, he said, what do you think? I said, oh, gee, that was great. I said, now, can I take you in and meet some of my friends? I had Bob and Dolores Hopes, who were friends of mine, and he always had a photographer with him. And that's one thing that Slim said to me, no pictures, no pictures. I said, I can't control people on holding cameras. As soon as I opened the door to go into the rest of the suite, first thing I knew, Bob Hope always had a cameraman with him, and he would have him taking pictures with different people. And boy, he was right there. And I got my shoulder up and got him blocked off, and he didn't get the picture. And I turned to Bob and I said, look, please ask your photographer to stay outside for right now until we finish this party. And so he got him to do that. And I introduced him to all of the people that he wanted to meet and I wanted him to meet. And we went down. Nobody recognized him. Walked through this big audience, standing room only, 1,800 people. And we sat down at our table. And I had Neil Armstrong next to me. My wife was sitting next to him, and Lindbergh was on the other side of my wife, Colleen. And Lindbergh leaned across to Neil, who was signing his autograph, and nobody recognized. I didn't even know Lindbergh was there, and we hadn't announced it. I had let no one know. And so Neil was just being Neil. He's another pilot like we are. And he was signing autographs and letting people take his picture. And old Slim looked across Colleen and said, you're going to regret this. To Neil. He said, this will come back to haunt you. And Neil turned over, looked at him square in the face, and he said, Mr. Lindbergh, these pilots have all risked their life too. And if they want my autograph, they're damn well gonna get it. And so he shut up. And he sat there and was very polite about everything. And then when I got on stage and I said, I've got a little surprise for everybody. I said, I've got a guest I want to introduce. I said, Slim, come up here and get on stage with me. And he did. And my God, I couldn't get the people to quit cheering and applauding. And it went on and on. And I kept trying to get some order in the place. And finally I said, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a pandemonium going here. We've got a big program, a lot of people to be honored tonight. And we've got to press on. And I turned to Slim and I said, you got it. People were coming up to the stage. I mean, it lost control. Everything was just gone to hell. And I said, you've got to just... Now he was beginning to melt. And I said, we just got to do what you got to do right now. And so he did, and the crowd was just wild. And then afterwards he was mobbed, and he broke down and even signed his name. I couldn't believe that. And lots of people took his picture. And before the night was over, he was a meltdown. I mean, he was one of us once again after all these years. But you know, he did a lot of wonderful things, and I'll always remember that. But I thought you might enjoy that little bit of history. Well, I've flown so many airplanes, it's very difficult to pick one, but I'll just start with the F-86. I was the chase pilot in the Air Force on the X-1 program with Chuck Yeager. And when Chuck and I were not going to be involved on our scheduled flights for the X-1, we had other assignments and would be called upon to test bombers or transports or fighters, anything that they said needed to be evaluated. We did. And so it turns out that the F-86 was an airplane that had a conventional flight control system that just like any other airplane. But when you get up to 500 miles an hour, it was going in a direction you were pointed. There was no maneuverability because you physically could not move the controls. And this was true with P-51s, P-47s. I did the compressibility work, which was the forerunner of trying to break the sound barrier long before the X-1. We lost 2 pilots, 2 airplanes, and we didn't know why. I found out. I said, what happened to make those 2 guys lose their lives? And they said, well, on the first one, they said, well, we think that he didn't react quick enough we had a new design that would put on the horizontal stabilizer right near the hinge point for the elevators. And it was supposed to break down the airflow, which is compressibility, and that sets us up a turbulence. And sometimes this turbulence is so quick that the airplane goes into pieces in milliseconds, just like that, and it's all over. And I said, I believe that the electric motor that operated that must have failed. And I bet it happened on each case of the loss of those pilots and airplanes. And I said, I'd like it to be made manual. And I said, put me a telescoping rod that I can have down here below the throttle quadrant and bring it up high enough to where I would have the leverage to pull. Because the airplane's going where it's pointed, but once you get up to the speeds above 500 miles an hour, about 8.3 is where we were going, what we were shooting for. And I got it that day. But I was reached down, I pulled it up, and I got it up to here, and I was pulling with both hands. And I had my knees on the stick like this, and it wasn't doing any good because it was going where it was headed. And I was pulling as hard as I could, direction at a time. I go little notches. And all of a sudden I heard the worst explosion you could ever imagine. And I was unconscious. And I came to, and my chase pilot, who was watching, we always had somebody watching us when we were on really high-risk programs. And I kept hearing him call my name. And I blinked my eyes and looked around and kind of put things together. The airplane was flying along in a gentle climb, and I was at about 12,000 feet going along. And my chase pilot said, Bob, he said, you've been unconscious for almost 15 minutes. And he said, you were lucky the airplane was trimmed just right, because I went right through blackout. It's so instantaneous. The wings buckled, and they folded up like this instead of straight out. They were like this. And he said, I think you're going to have to bail out because it looks like it's all put apart. And he said, I don't think you can land the airplane. And I said, well, what does the gear look like? Because the instrument panel had torn right out of the mounts. It was down on my ankles. And when I cleared up, and the engine was running fine, controls were okay, speed was moderate in a general climb. And I said, well, I think I'll try and land it. He said, Bob, I don't know if the gear is going to hold up. And it could really be a disaster for you if that gear folds with those wings folded up like that. Oh, they were bent up like this. They wrinkled all the way. And I said, well, I'm going to yaw the airplane and see if the gear moves in it all sidewise. And he said, I can't see any movement. Still had a lot of wind noise with it. All the doors. See, what had happened when the wings buckled, it released the uplocks on the landing gear, so the landing gear came out. And then the gear doors came off, and it started destroying the rest of the airplane. And it was a mess. It was a total loss. And I said, I'm going to try to land it. And he pleaded with me not to, but I did. And the landing was successful, and I parked it. And, of course, there was a wreckage from that on. And we didn't really learn very much about it, but we were working to find out where those vortices were that were creating the catastrophic destruction. And we did find out. And that's why they called it a sound barrier. But it really wasn't. It was just a breakdown of the flow of air off of that part. It could be the intersection of the wing. It could be the intersection on your tail section to the fuselage. It sometimes when it breaks, it goes from one place to the other, and it's like that, it's all over. Well, we found out the hard way, and we moved forward in the X-1 program, and I must tell you that I was on that program first because of all the other research I had done. My friend Chuck Yeager, who was a triple ace in War II, and one of the finest pilots I've ever flown against or with. And he did a magnificent job. But I was assigned first, and I pulled a buzz job for one of the other test pilots who had told people at the nearby airport that he was flying jets, and he wasn't. And I explained to him when he asked me, would I buzz the field, and he'd take credit for it. And I said, well, I never have enough fuel, because in those days we were just soaked up with taking, like a doctor writing a prescription, what had to be done. And I never had enough fuel to do anything with. But this day the air was too rough for me to get the data I needed. So I thought, well, I'll make a pass across there for my friend. And I did. And 2 months later, we had a new colonel who took over. And Chuck was a maintenance officer. And this colonel had been a maintenance officer. And so he said, he called me in, he said, Lieutenant, he said, did you buzz the Springfield airport on a given date? I said, yes, sir, I did. He said, well, I know two things about you. You're honest, because there was only one jet that flew in the whole United States that day, and you were in it. He said, so I know you're honest, but I also know that you're irresponsible. And I don't know who I'm going to select to replace you, but with your background, you're going to work with him and make this a successful program. Well, I was crestfallen, because I had worked hard to get to where I was, and I'd blown it all for nothing. And then a month or so went by, and this colonel called me in, the new colonel, and he said, do you know Captain Yeager? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, well, I've selected him. And he said, you're going to be his backup pilot. You're going to share all this knowledge you've got with him. And Chuck hadn't been to the test pilot school. And he said, you're going to make him successful. And I was inside smiling for all I could. It was hard for me to maintain my composure, because if I had to yield the position to anybody, I couldn't have found anyone better than Chuck Yeager. And he did a marvelous job, and nobody can ever say that he wasn't the best of the best. And I was so privileged to work with him and to see that program a great success. Unfortunately, I had another mishap the day before I was scheduled to fly the X-1. And that's where I started getting crippled up from all these broken bones I have. But I really regretted never getting to make a powered flight on the X-1. I went through all the rest of the terrifying moments. But you would never know about this, but think of it for a minute. When you were flying rocket airplanes, your eyeballs were glued to pressure gauges, because if you got the pressure at the wrong rate, it'd blow you to kingdom come. And you knew very well flying had to be secondary. You were concentrating on getting the right mixtures of fuel going into those rocket motors. And if you didn't, and we had it happen on the ground, and believe it or not, nobody was hurt. On the X-15, same thing. We had one blow up on the ground, just trying to get those mixtures just right. So it wasn't an easy job. It was done perfectly. Thank you.
If you have other questions, we just ask you signal one of our volunteers. We're off here, Tom. Hello. Just signal one of our volunteers with a mic. And just before you ask your question, because you talked about Chuck Yeager, you should know, Bob, that about 3 years ago in here, in front of several of us, Chuck Yeager said you were the finest pilot he ever flew with.
Bob, one of the best air show I've ever seen was the routine that you did in the Aero Commander. Can you tell us how you developed your energy management program?
Pretty simple, folks. It's pretty simple. I learned it when I first took that first flight. I got airsick. I was the most least likely student pilot anybody's ever seen. And any kind of abrupt movement, I wanted to toss my cookies. I could hardly wait to get on the ground. I'd be choking to death to get out of the airplane, go into tall weeds and toss my cookies. Every flight. And I felt sorry for myself, trying to get pity for myself. And I thought, that's all I'd ever thought about. From 6 or 7 years of age, building little model airplanes and gluing them together and from World War I. Turns out that, I'm sorry, somebody's trying to tell me something right here.
Putting it just a little closer to your ear.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Please excuse me. Thank you for pointing this out. Is that better for everybody?
Yes.
Thank you. Where was I? Excuse me. I've lost my thought.
You were talking about your energy management program.
Oh, yes.
That's right.
Energy management. I wanted to overcome my air sickness, and I had trouble with it. But I was convinced I was going to force myself to learn to fly. And when I soloed, I've said this many times before, the instructor started to get out of there. I said, oh, no, please don't get out. All I'd thought about was tossing my cookies. And he said, well, you made some good landings, so you're on your own. And I thought, oh, my gosh, I can't do it by myself. All I've been thinking about is getting in the weeds. Well, I did it. And I said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to learn to overcome it. But I couldn't. And so what I tried to do is every time I'd make a turn, I'd go into it so slow and so easy, I would try and sneak up on my upset stomach and try to get through it. And I'd come back and I'd still be uncomfortable. But I kept at it until I finally said, I'm going to conquer it. And I eventually did. But everything had to be done smoothly. And the first time, after I'd been soloed for a couple of hours, I was still uncomfortable. And I talked to the gentleman that taught me what he did. And I said, can anybody around here tell me how to do a roll? I said, I'm doing chandelles and pulling up very slowly and pulling down. And he said, I've taught you everything I know, and no one here on this airfield or anywhere around Nashville, Tennessee, knows any more about flying than we do right now. And I thought, well, okay. So I did this roll, put up into a chandelle one day after I was getting more bold, and I thought, why not just roll over? Well, here's why. As you pull up to do a roll, you're killing off your airspeed So you're losing your control effectiveness every time you start slowing down. The slower you get, the slower the rate of roll. Well, I got up to here, okay. But then when I got to there and wanted to pull through, the airplane, whew, and I was going almost straight down. Terrified. Never been there in that position before. And I managed to get out by doing the right thing by accident and pulling back on the stick. And so then I decided, boy, I had started at 2,000 feet and I was way below that when I recovered. You never can do anything. You pick up 2,000 feet and tell yourself, that's the ground. And from now on, you can't go below 2,000 feet. And so that was what be now indelible in my mind, 2,000 feet. And I started doing rolls. And I kept doing it until I could not go below 2,000 feet. And when I got to fly airplanes with more horsepower, I could do it even more smoothly and come out like that. And the first thing you know, everything I was doing was graceful and without G-forces because of air sickness. Now, if I rode with Sean Tucker, whom I admire and respect, and I think he's one of the best pilots we'll ever see, putting on a performance for us, I couldn't stand what he goes through. And I don't think any of you know what he has conditioned himself to. And he's not the only one. I noticed this pilot who flew yesterday from Embry-Riddle. He did a magnificent job. Another Sean Tucker, if you will. They do this because they're trained. You know what this means? I'm going to show you something that probably you're not familiar with. There is a condition that you can learn to develop yourself, and it happens at altitude. I first learned about it because we didn't have good oxygen masks in World War II, and there were times when I was launched to go after a would-be enemy, and it was so high, it was way up above 40,000 feet, and I didn't have enough oxygen. And so I learned to pressure breathe, and here's what it is. You go, and then lock all these muscles in your neck and throat. And that keeps the blood up in your head long enough for you to take a breath and then grab another one and do this. And it freshens up, your vision gets better. And I learned to get all the way up to 43,000 feet in a Spitfire chasing an enemy airplane because I could do that. And here's what Sean Tucker does. He's trained himself to take negative and positive. Now, this is a trick. You can't go from positive to negative, negative to positive, unless you are trained for it. Sean can handle it. He's trained for it. And anybody else who does what he's doing. If not, you're going to be unconscious just like that. We lost 3, or far more than that. I was invited by Northrop to fly the F-20 at the Paris Air Show. And they had one trip, they built 3 airplanes. And there was another company, but my company would let me fly with for other companies as long as it was not a conflict with contracts that we had with the Air Force or the military government. And so they permitted me to do this. And so they said I'd done that for them with the F-5 when it was new. Well, they had this new airplane, and they felt that if I flew it at the Paris Air Show, it would be the number 1 attraction. Because when I flew the F-5, I got the showmanship of the year. And that's what they were looking for. That's what sells airplanes. And so they were doing this maneuver. They were coming in, and going positive and then going negative back and forth like this. They popped out, and we lost one pilot there, and then they had one airplane that was on its way to Paris that I would have been flying, and he was practicing on the way over in Iceland. They had some spare time, and he was practicing. And lo and behold, positive, negative, and they lost him. And so the whole program was canceled. So I never got to fly the F-20. But what they do is something they've trained for, and you and I would have to train a long time in order to make that happen. I'm being waved at out there.
Back here.
A little bit. Could you tell us a little bit about the time you stole the FW-190?
Please repeat the question.
Can you tell us a little bit about the time you stole the FW-190?
I'll briefly tell you about it, but I don't like to. You are looking at the dumbest test pilot you've ever seen. I had dreamed of escaping and stealing a Focke-Wulf 190 because there was one of the prisoners of war. Somebody had told me he'd been stationed at Wright Field. Well, that's where I wanted to go when I came back home after being a prisoner of war. And so I heard about this fellow, and I became acquainted with him, and he finally confessed to me that he had been through the test pilot school and was sent to England to evaluate the captured German airplanes. And they had a newly captured Focke-Wulf 190, and he had just finished flying it for 10 hours. And so his mission was accomplished. He was supposed to head home. And he asked the general in command at the Red Air Force at the time if he could go on a combat mission, and he in turn said yes. And Gus got shot down on that first mission. And I don't remember all the details about how he was shot down, but he was captured. The Germans never found out his background. He was just another fighter pilot. And so I got acquainted with him because I knew somebody told me he'd been at Wright Field, where I hoped to someday be after the war. And so I got acquainted with him, and we became very good friends. And he finally confessed to me that he had 10 hours in the airplane and had went through everything with me on how to start it, everything's in German, of course. I couldn't read it or understand it, but he gave me what I could feel for it. Well, it was many months went by, and he and I had become good friends, and he told me a lot about what it was like testing research airplanes at Wright Field. And I was soaking up the information. But I forgot exactly all the details by the time I got out. And it was 2 weeks before the war ended, and it was foolish. We could hear the Russians just a few miles away. The big guns were going. The terror troops, of Russian terror troops, came through and destroyed the towns that killed people by the numbers, big numbers. Well, I got out 2 weeks before the war ended. I went over the fence, and I had gotten some of my friends on the escape committee whom I'd worked with for the whole time I was there, because I never gave up from the day they got me until I got out. I was up here, get out of here, figure out a way to do it. And I spent a lot of time in solitary, which is what your punishment was. And sometimes you got beat up pretty bad, But no, incidentally, I did have one person write to the VA after the war, and he said, I was in the cell with him when they came in and beat him unconscious and dragged him out by his heels. And I don't know if he ever survived or not, but I wanted to report this, that I last saw him. And anyway, I obviously got well from that very easily, but it was the worst thing I could have ever thought of doing. So stupid. I got out. We went across the countryside. A woman gave me a gun and said, first thing, I had written a note saying, this lady has fed us, we're starving, and be kind to her. She's helped us in our escape. And she didn't read the paper. I thought that she'd give me, and I had a pencil that I'd ask her for, and that was the end of it, and I shook hands with her. First eggs we'd eaten for God knows how long, and a good slice of bread, and some potatoes. We were starving by then. Anyway, I left the farmhouse and shaking hands with her, and we were walking away, and I heard somebody screaming. I turned around, and a woman was coming toward me. I ran back to see what was wrong with her, and she had the note. She said, I just read the note for the first time. And she had this card, gave me the cartridges, and off I went. Well, I went across the countryside, and we were in and out of the Russian lines and saw atrocities that are indescribable. And I had one lady in one little village say, you're an American. And I looked at her. She spoke very good English. And she had a bandage on her as part of her hand. And she said, you're headed home, aren't you? She spoke very good English. I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, I want you to take this with you. And you take it back to your country and share it with everybody. I'm going to take you on about a 5-minute walk. And she took us there. And here was a little village. And she took me in this store. And bodies here, bodies there, bodies there. All of them with their throats slit. And they were just, some of them were just leaning over the counter. They came in. And then she said, on the way away from it, she said, I want you to look down in this ditch here. And there were bodies like you couldn't believe, just pulled apart. And the storm forces from Russia had been through there the night before. And I was in and out of the Russian lines. The Russians felt that anyone who was captured was no longer a friend of them. He should have died for his country. And so they would, when they got the prisoners, if they said they were a prisoner of war, they got the firing squad from their own forces, because that's the way the Russians felt about it. Well, I won't bore you with stories like that, but in and out of those lines was the most frightening experiences I've had, and I've had the Russians come into one place where I was. We were sleeping in a barn, and there must have been about 30 or 40 people who were conscripted labor from France, and they were all sleeping in the straw. And they came in with pitchforks and went like this and killed all the people that were there. And there was one woman who was looked to me like she was about ready to domino, pregnant. And they killed her, they slit her throat, and a dozen men raped that woman after she was dead. All Russians. I tell you, the horror thoughts that those of us who saw this, And at this time, I had 2 other people with me that I was joined up with, Americans, and we were all on our way out. It was a terrifying experience to be behind those Russian lines, and we had to be there for quite a while before we finally got out. And we always said when the Russians would talk to us, we had never been captured, we'd say, we are escaped and have never been captured. Because if you said you were captured, they'd do you in. Anyway, it was a horrible experience. But back to the 190, I got in this airplane, off I went. I didn't taxi out. As soon as I pulled the gear handle up, I thought, okay, you dumbhead. You got swastikas around you, no parachute. I couldn't find a cushion, so I was down in the cockpit looking like this, hardly out, being able to see out. And I had to get somebody to start it. We had this pistol, put it on this guard who happened to walk by. I saw him in his mechanic's uniform. I motioned for him to come in, and I couldn't communicate. And my friend who escaped with me, one of 2, he said, I'm going to try my French on it. And the fellow understood French. And he told him I wanted to fly the airplane out, and if I didn't make it, he was dead because he had the gun. And the guard started trembling and turning white, started perspiring. And I got in the cockpit, and he made him get up there with the point of the gun and help me start it from the outside, because everything Gus Lundquist had taught me was history. And I looked at it, everything in German. I couldn't remember what he had told me. So I couldn't have started it. So he got it started, and I did know where the landing gear was and how to get that up. And so I just decided I can't take a chance on getting shot at by taxiing to a runway. So I came right out of this revetment, which is an enclosure with a canvas over the top that's camouflaged, and it made it look as if there was just nothing there. And that's the way we hit our airplanes, and that's the way they hit theirs on airfields. And they were just a disguise. But I went out of there, got airborne. There was a ceiling at about 4,000 feet. But as soon as I got the wheels up, I thought, the war is practically over. And you stupid nut, here you are in an airplane, no parachute, and you can't hardly see out. And you know you got gas, but that's all. And so I got underneath these clouds, and I thought, if I get attacked by our friends, I'll just duck up into the clouds for a few minutes and then pop out and get back on my visibility. I knew I had to see windmills to know that I was out of Germany. And I got to the windmills, and then I couldn't find any place to land, low on fuel. I got to the Zuyder Zee, I found out afterwards, and I circled it because I was so low on fuel. I was worried about having the dead stick. And so it looked pretty good to me. And I put the wheels down, landed, and once I got on the ground, I looked out, and I saw a big ditch that I had not seen from the air. And I decided I better ground loop it, wipe out the landing gear, because if I went into that ditch, it would flip and burn it, and I'd be trapped inside of it, nobody anywhere. And so I did that, and I sat there in the airplane thinking about how stupid I was, and I finally got up, and I thought, I remembered that there was a little road on the other side of some trees, and so I decided I'd go out and go through the trees to get to that road and maybe find I knew I was in Holland, find a Dutchman or a British who were occupying at the time and get some help. And so I got into the forest, and I was trying to find my way through there to get to the other side of the forest of trees. And all of a sudden I looked around and I had pitchforks coming at me from every angle. It was the Dutch, and they thought I was a German. And so I put my hands up and I kept pointing out in that direction. And they followed me, and I kept doing this and waving my hand, and they let me walk. And I walked right on out of the forest to the dirt road that I had seen. And I'm standing there thinking, boy, if only I could get a British truck or somebody I could talk to. And I could communicate it all. And all of a sudden I could see a truck, dust coming from a truck on this dirt road. And it was a British truck. And I got right in the middle of the road still, holding my arms up and waving them. The truck stopped, and it was a British truck. And the driver said, what's part of you bothered you? And I said, well, these people think I'm a German. And I said, I escaped in one of their airplanes, and I can't communicate with them. And he said, I say, old chap, pop in. Off I went. My last thought for you is, have you heard a story that's more stupid than that? Everybody thinks, well, you did such a great thing. You're a blooming idiot, that's what I was.
That must be a good place to quit. Thank you so much, Bob Hoover.